Thank you for coming to my session. I know I titled my session a little bit, in retrospect, maybe a little bit snottily. I didn't think it through till after I'd submitted, and then it's too late. So anyway, I'm going to try to talk about why we should do science, I guess, and why we need classical education for engineering and such like. Right? I am a chemist. I'm an inorganic chemist, which is almost as far away from living things as you can get. I'm not a physical chemist. That's like the one step further. I got my undergraduate, though, at Hillsdale College. So I've got, I went there specifically so that I could get the liberal arts also with the chemistry. And so I'm going to try to talk about really kind of three things here. We've got the unity of human thought. It's kind of a big deal for me. Also, the nature of the physical world and especially the human person, what we actually know about that from the Bible and Christian teaching and the Lutheran confessions, and why that matters, and why I think it's important that we need to put human thought back together. Sort of like three parts. And I want to start with a little bit on how I view the physical world. And I think the best example is when you garden, you plant, I planted tomato seeds, and we ask, why does the seed sprout, right? And there's, if you're theologically inclined, there is the relatively straightforward theological answer. That's not really necessarily the answer the scientist wants first, right? So you get you look through the seed sprouting, and you sort of get the farmer's answer where it's warm enough and there's enough water, it's not too wet, not too dry, and the seed sprouts. And that's definitely not the answer the scientist wants. It's just like a little taste, because the scientist wants to know why the seed sprouts. And so you go actually into the biochemistry of the seed sprouting and the thermodynamics of the seed sprouting. And I love whiteboards, and I write stuff on whiteboards kind of for fun while I'm talking. It's just a bad habit anyway. So there is very simple looking math. It's actually very complicated about the thermodynamics of why the seed sprouts. That term is the temperature, so it does in fact have to be warm enough for the seed to sprout. And if you contemplate all the things you know about the biochemistry, the regular chemistry, the effect of water on the system, the thermodynamics, you can kind of get a brief glimpse of the science, the whole picture, scientifically why the seed sprouts. The interesting thing is, when this happens, it almost becomes transparent. And when we're going to get to this idea of seeing through in a minute. We're going to come back to that. But it sort of becomes transparent. And what's on the other side of that answer, if you don't know the revealed truth and you don't have the Christian faith, it will look like nothing. This is why I'm convinced that scientists, I don't think I'm the only one who can actually sort of grasp the whole idea and any scientific idea. But if you do that, you see that there's nothing that human reason can comprehend on the other side. And when you look at it and you know about Christ and Him crucified, you see that what's on the other side is the theological answer. We sort of came at it the backwards way. We find out that the seed sprouts because God in His mercy has decided that the world isn't ending yet, and He has promised seed time and harvest. And so the seed sprouts. I think that this vision of the physical world not being cut completely from sort of the spiritual world. I think the physical world is part of it. This is part of creation. And I think that view of the world is an important view for the rest of the points I wanted to make. That's why I kind of started with this view of the physical world being not brightly delineated from the spiritual. All right, so I thought the best way to try to make the point that human thought is unified, and it's not actually qualitatively different if you're studying the liberal arts, or if you're studying how to build a bridge, or if you're studying chemistry, was to look at some similarities. And I have a sonnet, and this will make sense. It all kind of works out eventually. I'm the chemistry professor that teaches students how to read sonnets. It happens. Anyway, it won't take very long, so bear with me. You may recognize it. It's not like it's one that I wrote. At the round earth's imagined corners blow your trumpets, angels, and arise, arise from death, you numberless infinities of souls. And to your scattered bodies go, all who flood did, and fire shall o'erthrow, all who war, dearth, age, agues, tyrannies, despair, law, chance hath slain. And you whose eyes shall behold God and never taste death's woe. But let them sleep, Lord, and be mourn a space. For if above all these my sins abound, 'tis late to ask abundance of thy grace when we are there, here on this lowly ground. Teach me how to repent, for that's as good as if thou hadst sealed my pardon with thy blood. Now, I've got a rubric here for a sonnet, and this rubric says the rhyme scheme's supposed to be A, B, C, D, E, F, G, G. Let's see. Blow, arise, infinities go. Overthrow. It's like this guy didn't even pay attention to the assignment. My rubric also says that there needs to be a clear turn. Like we have to have a volta right there at the end. But, you know, it's not super sharp. So, you know, I don't know, maybe in that row, I mean, this is a scale of 1 to 5, maybe that's a 3. And the rhyme scheme, it's definitely got one, but it's not the assignment. So I don't know. Oh, maybe we'll give that a 3. And I actually did look up a sonnet rubric. Anyway. So what have we done, though? I mean, we've murdered John Donne's poem, right? By analyzing it too much, we've murdered the poem. We've killed it. My other example, we could develop a rubric. I've got a pond out my window, and we'll say this is wings, this is a thorax, and we get these beautiful dragonflies. And we could make a rubric for a dragonfly and catch the dragonfly and pull its wings off and put it in the row and pull its legs off with tweezers and put it in the legs row and grade them on a scale of 1 to 5. And we've killed it, right? I think we did the same thing to the poem. And so this sort of backs me into one of the criticisms of science that I picked it from a source I think pretty much people know, The Abolition of Man. I'm going to really mildly disagree with C.S. Lewis. So he talks about analytical understanding, and I have a short little quote. He says, perhaps in the nature of things, analytical understanding must always be a basilisk, which kills what it sees and only sees by killing. But if the scientists themselves cannot arrest this process before it reaches the common reason and kills that too, then someone else must arrest it. And I don't disagree that this is essentially one way that science can work. There are scientists that catch the dragonfly and tear its legs off. But I think, and the reason I had one of the best sonnets I think ever written to start with here, is I think that this is actually a common property of all human analysis, that sometimes analysis has to be done. Sometimes you do have to know how something actually functions, and you do need to see it in its parts. But human analysis is equally capable of murdering John Donne's Divine Sonnet as it is of murdering the dragonfly. I think that Lewis is so honed in on the science, he's missed that you can murder an idea too. You can murder a poem too. You could take a great piece of art and analyze it and take it apart into its pieces and kill it. I actually think that this is, I think in the sermon last night at Vespers, it was mentioned that without Christ and a good education, what we make is monsters, right? And I think that's absolutely accurate. This is the monster that I think happens if you stop at the logic phase. I think that this is why we need rhetoric after logic. If you stop at the logic phase and you don't have Christ, you are the monster that tears things apart to see what's inside and never actually grasps that there's something whole and something beautiful that shouldn't be torn apart, or if you do, sort of with fear and trembling, right? I don't believe that we should never do certain experiments that are queasy, right? I think it's good that surgeons know what's inside the body before they try to save a living person, for example. But this is the kind of thing that needs to be treated with sort of fear and trembling. We're treading on something bigger than the sum of its torn apart parts that are put on the rubric. All right, that's my first similarity. And I want to sort of, I've got a short quote. Graham Greene has a story called A Visit to Morin, and he sums up the idea very well. And so since he did it really well, I'll tell you what he said. So he's talking he's talking to a man who it's a very complicated story. Anyway, he's talking about faith. And the guy in the war asked a chaplain, it's a Catholic chaplain, about the faith. And so the chaplain has lent him, and here's the quote. He says, the chaplain, lent me 2 books. One, a penny catechism with its catalog of preposterous questions and answers, smug and explanatory. Mystery like a butterfly killed by cyanide, stiffened and laid out with pins and paper strips. And I think that idea that you can murder the mystery too is an important one. All right. The next similarity goes back to that seeing through things. And if you, in The Abolition of Man also, Lewis talks about seeing through things. And eventually you'll see through so much that, the man who sees through everything is blind. That you see through things to see what's on the other side, right? And again, that's absolutely true. As a specific criticism of scientists, I think it's too narrow, right? At Hillsdale, one of the grand things, I have no idea if people still do this, but when I was there, if you smoked a pipe or a cigar and you just talked about ideas, like, all the time, right? That's what people who smoke their pipe and their cigar do. And it was really a lot of fun. But the people most obsessed with seeing through things were the philosophy majors. Right? So this passion for seeing through, I think, is sort of the grotesquerie of an actual skill that's necessary. And I think it's the skill of rhetoric, which is, I'm going to try to demonstrate it first, the seeing through. I want you to think of a cube. We'll use a cube. It's a good solid solid geometric shape. Everybody knows what a cube looks like. Probably everybody knows how you draw a cube. Yeah, don't make fun of my cube. All right, okay, cube. Is this a cube?
No.
No! And someone else. I know him from, not Hillsdale, actually, from Purdue. Anyway, no, this is not a cube. This is a symbol of a cube, right? We have to see, I've read a little too much Umberto Eco. We have the sign and the thing which is signified on the other side. But we have a symbol of a cube, and we have to use our ability to grasp the whole of an idea to look through the symbol and understand the idea. All right, so that's geometry. In chemistry, we have something, a specific category of reaction. We have combustion reactions. We have something like C3H8 goes to, that's 3 CO2s and 4 waters and 5 oxygen. Okay. This is similarly not a combustion reaction. I happen to have a combustion reaction machine here. There. That's a combustion reaction, right? It's actually the one I wrote on the board. It's propane burning with oxygen in the atmosphere. But we, in geometry and in science, we have to look through the explanation and try to grasp the real idea on the other side. How about the idea of, this is one that has essentially been killed unless you read old enough books. The idea of a good king. There's something on the other side of those words that is a real thing. Not a very common thing in history, but there's a real thing that is a good king on the other side. I've got another one. This time I'm going to sketch a couple of symbols because we convey meaning through symbols too. You have to forgive me that the dark side is sort of just scribbled on. Everybody knows what I drew there, right? What about this one? There's an idea on the other side of these symbols, right? Because people communicate not just through words and chemical reactions and books, but also through symbols. And there's an idea on the other side. Both of these symbols, when used to convey their metaphysical idea, not necessarily on a flag, right? But to convey the metaphysical idea, both of these ideas are dualism. Both of these convey the idea that you have the order, light, creator God, disorder, chaos, the God that brings enlightenment to people. It's the devil's favorite idea, right? We have dualism, like the Manichees. But we have to look through the symbol to what's on the other side. So I think this looking through is an activity of the human reason, not just an obsession of the sciences. I think I've got, I don't know, I felt like this was a pretty good case that it sort of spans human reason. So what I'm going to do, this is actually why I wanted the whiteboard. I'm going to draw an XY axis because I actually am a scientist by training and by really liking graphing things. So you can draw it along with me too. And we have this XY axis, and I thought long and hard about what these axes should be. And I came to the conclusion that this is math, and we'll say +4 to -4. And you're going to ask, some of you may ask, how you can have negative math. It's a log scale. And if you didn't wonder, if you didn't wonder why we can have negative math, then you don't have to worry about the explanation. All right, on this scale is dirt. And for the same reason, we can have -4 dirt. That's okay. That's just 10 to the -4th. I don't mean metaphysical dirt. I mean actual dirt, or slimy things that get your hands dirty, like gardening or spilling hydrogen peroxide on your hand, and then your finger starts to peel. That kind of thing. I think we can put every activity of human reason onto this plane, onto this axis. And I've got a few. My personal discipline is somewhere around here. This is inorganic chemistry. I should probably give it its RY. Inorganic chemistry, I'd put here. There's quite a bit of math, but not as much math as you can possibly do. That'd be somewhere over there. And we do a lot of stuff in our minds, but then we actually have to go mix stuff, try not to spill it on your hands, get your hands dirty, that kind of thing. For the sake, I have lots of these things, but for the sake of time, I'm going to put down here symbolic logic. We can also say down here where the only risk to your hands getting dirty is you might get ink on your fingers as you write. I mean, there's technically some risk, but very little. Symbolic logic, but you can also put mathematics, like the real far level mathematics. We can put that there. We'll put one over here. Essentially no math, but lots of gross stuff. Okay, I just gave it away. I clapped out of biology, and I never did anything with the life sciences. And, somewhere over here with not much math, not much getting your hands dirty, I think this is certain kinds of philosophy. Some philosophy is essentially math, but for philosophers, right? I understand. That's kind of what I put symbolic logic over there anyway. At least what people envision as philosophy. We have sort of like quadrants of human thought. And there are philosophers that are actually almost scientists, they just don't get their hands dirty. I have a colleague at Concordia who I see is on a list of scholars. Angus Manouge, Dr. Manouge, is fantastic, amazing. He'd be a scientist if he ever stepped into a lab, he'd immediately become a scientist. But he's a philosopher, right? So it's quite remarkable, I think, that these are all similarities. One more thing before we move on. Lewis also, in the same thing, addresses, he talks about science and magic as twins. Is anyone kind of familiar with that? And he talks about how, I've got the quote somewhere, but that's okay. He talks about how magic was given up because it failed. But science was pursued because people could get power that way. And later, as I realize about my time, I've got lots of ideas and not much time apparently. I'm not so sure that the people who do the magic are convinced that it failed. But I think that we could put categories of magicians on the same plot here. He's only thinking of the alchemist who's trying to convert base metals into gold, and the same process thereby convert your spirit into a divine spirit, right? That's the reason it's magic and not a crazy scientist. He's thinking of alchemists or the magician who's trying to make a golem. These are very similar to certain scientific pursuits. But he's forgetting that like permutation mathematics, some of the pioneers of permutation mathematics were Jewish sorcerers who were trying to do magic with the name of God, and they wanted to know how many different combinations there possibly were. And so they were working out how to solve, if you've got 3 different letters and 4 spaces, how many possibilities there were. So that's down here, and it's also magic. And over here, you can't forget that there are magicians who believed that, or maybe still believe, that your words have power, and the words you say are actually capable of changing the natural world around you. That's magic down here. I think every human pursuit, when it desires power and it is not sanctified through faith in Christ, ends up doing something very evil. I don't think that's unique to science. All right, so now I want you in your mind to take this axis and turn it on its side. We can do that, right? So how about this? If you have an axis, the XY axis on your paper, you've already done it. I want you to think about the third axis, essentially. And for some people, there's no problem in envisioning the other direction, and some people have trouble. But I believe that human reason forms, it's a metaphor, so you give it up, when it stops being useful, but forms a plane. And God's revealed truth is external to us, and it comes down to us. So you can envision it sort of coming down onto your paper. And so the things that we need to know most, like human nature, are the value of things. Like, what is the value of a dragonfly? I don't think philosophy can teach us that either. I think that comes from externally. God teaches us the value of the dragonfly. So we can think of God's revelation sort of impinging upon human thought. And I think this is an important way as we step into, first we had unity of thought. Now I'm trying to talk about what a person actually is. And we can't view the person in sort of there's a tendency to sort of a soft Gnosticism, especially when people like to sit around and think, where we view the body as almost unnecessary. We view the body as the lesser part of man. I read that, and I don't have time for the quote, but there are people who are in the classical world who view the body as the lesser part of the man. And that is not what we're taught, right? We don't look forward to eternity in paradise as a spirit. We look forward to the resurrection of the dead, the body. Our body is somehow critically part of us. We don't need to answer how, but our body is part of us. We're not meat robots piloted by souls, right? What you do to the body affects your soul. This is why we flee sexual immorality, why we don't get drunk, because what you do to the body affects your soul. And so this view of the body and this view of the physical world as not a mistake of creation, that's a very Gnostic view, right? Creation, the physical world isn't a mistake. Matter isn't evil. Matter is what God made. So because of that, this is why the liberal arts are important, because that's how you actually understand things, right? This grammar, logic, rhetoric, this is how you learn to talk about stuff, right? I'm just rounding, right? Talk about stuff, you need the vocabulary, grammar phase, understand it sort of in that analytical method in the logic phase, and hopefully in the rhetoric phase, you can actually grasp the whole idea. And that, to actually see what's beautiful about the whole idea, I think you need the Holy Spirit. We do all of this, you can learn anything, or you could grasp any idea, right? That's what you're actually learning. And the physical world and the things that we do with our hands, these things matter because God gives us work. And because I'm me, I have another poem. This one is called The Elixir. This is one of my favorite poems to make students read. It's by George Herbert, and it's only 6 stanzas, so I'll take the time to read it too. It says, "Teach me, my God and King, in all things thee to see, and what I do in anything, to do it as for thee. Not rudely as a beast to run into an action, but still to make thee prepossessed, and give it his perfection. A man that looks on glass, on it may stay his eye, or if he pleaseth, through it pass, and then the heavens spy. All may of thee partake, nothing can be so mean, which with his tincture, for thy sake, will not grow bright and clean. A servant with this clause makes drudgery divine, who sweeps a room as for thy laws, makes that in the action fine. This is the famous stone, that turneth all to gold, for that which God doth touch and own cannot for less be sold. I really like this one because it puts, we've got human vocation, we've got the fact that God gives us the medicine for our souls in physical form. God heals our souls by giving us food and drink, right? He gives us himself in body and blood. And it's got this vision of the person, this whole person. I think drudgery, sweeping a room, building a bridge, being a nurse, being I, as an inorganic chemist, I'm essentially in the liberal arts now because it's not super useful, right? It's something that you study because you find it really interesting, not because I'm going to make a lot of money as an inorganic chemist. I'd have been a chemical engineer if I wanted to make a lot of money at my degree, right? So I'm standing on the line. But all of these things are the work that God's given us to do, and they're the things, this drudgery, this is actually working in the garden, right? God put man in a garden. We are no longer in paradise, but essentially we are all still gardeners. I think science is, done properly, obviously, is a form of gardening. All right. Ooh. 9:50. All right. I'd like for a little while to talk about why I think it's really important we sort of try to not leave expertise to the experts. We need to sort of reconnect human thought a little bit. At the very least, the scientists and the engineers need to talk with the philosophers and the theologians. I think scientists should have intellectual hobbies of poetry and literature or art, and people who can read Caesar in his own words should consider having something in the sciences as an intellectual hobby. Like, you could study epidemiology when you smell a rat on the news, right? If something gets interesting to you, there's no reason why you couldn't also do that and sort of reconnect human thought. And I think it's because of the challenges of the world today. And I think I've got one more example from a book. It's called The Name of the Rose. I picked it because it's got a famous scene for abduction. Umberto Eco really loved abduction. He really loved Sherlock Holmes. And the main character in The Name of the Rose, he names him William of Baskerville. William of Baskerville feels so real that Sherlock Holmes feels like the knockoff. It's really that well done. But in the opening scene, he's deduced the abbot's missing horse. The name of the horse, the color of the horse, the size of the horse, where the horse is. And he's deduced it by watching the signs on the trail, right? He sees the signs and he interprets them. He understands the signs. And I think, when we look at the world around us, I think there are signs. And maybe the interpretation needs worked on, but I'm going to sketch it out because I don't have a horse, but I have some signs, right? One of them is from a modern current thinker called Yuval Harari. And if you haven't heard of Harari, now's a good time. He is not a friend. Yuval Harari believes that with our modern understanding of biology, with the modern data that you can collect on people because they give it to them on their phones, and modern data processing techniques, you can warp and hack the human spirit. That's essentially what he believes. And his problem with it is that he thinks he should be the one doing it, not other people who are going to do it wrong. Not that you shouldn't do this. Right? That's why I say he's not a friend. But that's one clue that the forces aligned against us know how to control the endorphin in your brain. They know that that actually will affect, because your body is an integral part of you, that will actually affect your spirit. And they're willing to do this for their own profit and fun. I mean, some of it's just fun. That's one clue. But the biggest clue, I think, is in the new modern religion, right? I have pictures, but obviously I'm not going to show you pictures here. You all, I think, have driven through Fort Wayne, and you've seen the Rainbow Pride, Fort Wayne Pride flags. Did you see those? Right? In the Wisconsin State Capitol has the pride flag with the transgender triangle. London streets have the pride flag with the transgender triangle and the circle that I don't keep up. I don't know what the circle's for. Intersex. Intersex. See, Sam knows. So, like lining the streets, like hanging from flags. And I think that the fundamental teaching here is it's beyond do whatever you want, let's just enjoy ourselves. There's actually a theology behind this. And that says that your body is meat. And your spirit, the Creator can mess up. And your spirit cannot match your body because the Creator can mess up. And if you look at this hard enough, what you see, I believe, is a form of Gnostic dualism. Now, if you go ask them, what do you believe? They're not going to say, I'm a Gnostic dualist. Right? But I think the track is there. I think that when you look at it, people are taught to believe that they can be the wrong species and they can surgically adjust their bodies so that they can look more like a dragon because they're dragonkin. I don't actually think you should Google search that, but you could take my word for it, or you could go look. People do that. They will surgically change their bodies, not just to pretend to be a different gender, but to pretend to be a different species, because the physical world, the Creator messed up. And your spirit is what matters only, and you should adjust the physical world to match the spiritual world. To me, that sounds like Gnostic dualism. And since the enemy sees the world as sort of this whole, I think we need to sort of reunite. I think the sciences and the theologians and the philosophers have been apart too long. I think we need to sort of recombine human knowledge into one thing under the teaching of theology. And I don't know exactly when I'm supposed to stop, but it looks like it's almost 11. I think that's probably about when I'm supposed to stop. And I'd be happy to talk about stuff. I mean, I have crazy ideas, and I'm delighted to talk about them.
Yeah, if you have time for a quick question. First, thanks on the Gnosticism. I think you're spot on with that diagnosis. But then going back to liberal as compared to servile arts, would it be fair to say that your field, like chemistry, is partly in the liberal arts and is partly in the servile arts, and likewise for the humanities, right? These philosophers, at least the way philosophy is done today, they're not all necessarily good liberal artists. And so looking at the quadrivium, we see astronomy and music too, we're both there. But it was the theoretical aspects, the first principles aspects. So music, the law of harmony, astronomy, what really, helps us figure out these motions that we observe. As compared to kind of the crassly physical nuts and bolts part of it, which also is important, but it lacks that. Let's step back and get the fuller perspective. So for lack of a better word, can we say that when you're a chemist and you're stepping back and looking for first principles, you're being a liberal artsy chemist?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think the distaste for actually doing the physical part is an ancient Greek, right? That's not actually a Christian thing.
Right.
The ancient Greeks didn't really like the idea of experimenting, right? But absolutely, when you look back and you try to understand the first principles, you're definitely doing the same thing. And then I feel like I'm amazingly blessed. I can go over here and try and see if I'm right. And there's a lot of things in politics and in human nature that it's either impossible or wildly unethical to experiment to see if you're right, right? So that is a difference. Like I actually get to go see if I'm right. And if I'm not right, then, I get black sludge. There's the famous philosopher of science, Karl Popper. He's got stages of scientific inquiry. And I'm not going to try to recite them, but the first three are all essentially the liberal arts. Only the last one is go and do it. You're supposed to think about it, determine whether it's meaningful, whether it's new, whether it's actually going to be testable. The first three are all entirely in the mind and entirely on that step back and think first principles. It's only the last 10% of the work, really, that's let's go test it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm struck by the connection here maybe with your quotation from C.S. Lewis about when you see through everything, you see nothing. So there's a certain perspective maybe which the liberal arts allow you to see through things, but the servile arts are what you see and how you actually love your neighbor. Right? Like it's the physical things you're doing in the physical world. So you do both.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. Well, thank you very much for coming and listening to me.